Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to this stream. This is going to be talking about Overwatch League. What a surprise! Who saw that coming? It's almost like it's in the title. Anyway, it is, of course, Thursday, which means that we're going to be doing some predictions today. But it's also been about a week since the Overwatch League started. So today we're going to be doing something slightly different. We're going to be going back. We're going to be taking a look at all the key talking points from last week very briefly. And we're also going to be looking at some of the upcoming talking points from this week. So stay tuned. There's a little bit of a news vibe to this. I'm calling this my mini podcast. There is no name yet. Don't worry about it. And we're just going to go through some stuff, and then we're going to do some predictions, and then I'm going to go back to playing Overwatch 2 because I can. Simply, I can. All right, awesome, cool. Now that you're all on board with that, let's get into the start of this. So my first topic I wanted to talk about very quickly. Last week, Vancouver Titans. I put a lot of stock into the Vancouver Titans last week. I gave them so much. I gave them everything I had. And they let me down. I am incredibly disappointed, I'm going to be honest with you. They probably had the two easiest matches on everybody's books of the season. They had to play London, and they had to play Boston, and they got two maps off Boston. They almost beat them. They were pretty close. They were genuinely pretty close, but they got 3-0'd by the London Spitfire. And London Spitfire were playing Rush, so it's an interesting time to be a Vancouver fan. I mean, I still think there's a lot of hope for this team. I am still riding high on the Titans copium, but the fact of the matter is that, you know, you lose to these two teams. Where is the hope? So I guess the real key question is, are these guys in trouble? You know, do they actually have a team that's going to be able to compete? I mean, I'm sure they're going to be able to pick up a win somewhere along the year, but as it stands right now, they just lost the Bread Bowl in week 1. Literally in week 1. Which is terrifying if you're a Vancouver fan. That is utterly terrifying. So we'll see what happens. This week they've got some matches that, again, are relatively winnable in my personal opinion. So we'll just have to see how we go. I mean, will I pred them again? Probably not, but we'll see what happens. Shame, Vancouver, you let me down. I'm very, very, very upset by this one. Okay. The second key talking point that happened from last week is live events have returned to the Overwatch League in the form of the Battle of Texas in San Antonio. The Houston Outlaws had their homestand. Honestly, live events rock. Live events genuinely rock so hard. This crowd was popping off. You could hear it as the gameplay was going on, so every time that Dante was making a move on the Doomfist or there was a humongous tac visor coming out from Merit, then the crowd were going crazy. And it was an absolute joy to see everything return to what it could have been as normal. It's wonderful, wonderful post-pandemic. And the game wasn't too shabby as well. I mean, I made a video on this already. Houston did kind of decimate Dallas. I think Dallas probably came out with quite a few nerves into this game. And Houston, as I've always believed, when you're running a homestand, you do get a crowd boost advantage. But they played remarkably well to be able to shut down Dallas for a grand majority of this game and take the 3-0, putting them in a prime position at the top of everybody's power rankings until they went and played Toronto. So honestly, it's really nice to see live events coming back. I would love to see more live events. Obviously, my plan is, being in the UK, I would like to go out and see a couple this year. If I can, that would be absolutely wonderful. But, you know, we can't keep our hopes up too much. We've got to just simply see how the global bastard operates. Global bastard being the Rona. So yeah, really good stuff. Good stuff, Houston. Solid event. We love that. Wonderful. Right, to the other big organizations, step up. So, obviously, that was quite a big upset this season. Already on Dallas, I think nobody pinned Houston to beat Dallas in the first week, or at least very, very few people. I think I saw the statistics saying 1.9%. So, interesting. I think I'm gonna put the table up from NA. Obviously, APAC haven't played yet, but I was thinking for this bit, who's the real deal? What is the real top of NA right now? What do the top teams look like in Overwatch 2? And unfortunately, I think the answer is we actually just don't know yet. So as you can see, the teams at the top of the table are Shock and Atlanta and Gladiators. All three of them didn't drop a game this weekend. They're currently the only three teams that have gone unbeaten. But I think all three of them had reasonably easy games, you know? Shock had London and Paris, and I've got London and Paris at the bottom of my power rankings, and they beat them very convincingly. I think Atlanta played exceptionally well against Florida, who I think Florida did look quite decent, to be perfectly honest. And then obviously they rolled the NYXL, who didn't look too shabby. And Gladiators got to play against Boston. They got to play against New York as well. Both teams who really didn't come out looking spectacular this weekend. So all three of them had easy games, and they're the ones sat at the top. Houston obviously losing to Toronto, Toronto losing to Washington, Washington losing to Dallas, and Dallas losing to Houston. It's a whole cycle in there of teams that are beating each other. So there really isn't any clear way to tell what the top team is other than what you assess from the gameplay. And I think at this point in time, it's simply that we haven't seen enough to be able to tell. Hopefully, though, with this week, we're going to see some really big upcoming crunch matches. And in those crunch matches, I think that we're going to get a much better gauge for who really is sitting at the top of NA right now. But we'll get into that one just a little bit later. I just wanted to focus on one more point before we look forward to this week. And that is simply the two big comps that we used this week were Doomfist and Winston comps. There was obviously a DPS cycle as well with Echo, Genji, Tracer, Soldier, etc. A bit of Reaper thrown in there as well, who were all being used to counter each other, kind of. So when people were running Doomfist Echo, a team in response would run a Tracer and a Soldier. To counter that, people run Tracer, you run a Genji in response to that kind of thing. So there was quite a lot of counterpicking, which is quite good for the game. That means that a lot of these heroes are relatively well balanced, and that means that counterpicking is a legitimate strat instead of there just being one defined meta. But I think the key components of the compositions came down to the main tanks. Both of these tanks endorse a dive style, so if you want to know a little bit more about what I think about that in detail, go and take a look at that video. That video looks at the Houston and Dallas match in way more depth, and it does explain how Doomfist comps differ to Winston comps and why the dive is more aggressive and how it has to be way cleaner. It's interesting. I worked very hard on it. I think it's a really good watch. And also tell me your thoughts on it. Tell me if you liked it or hated it. Honestly, I would just like to know what people think. That would matter to me very much. But seeing as that those are the most prominent comps at the moment, I think it sets a precedent going into this week now, into this weekend, should I say, that certain teams with better monkey players, i.e. Winston players, are probably going to perform better against other teams with slightly worse main tank players. The main tank difference is really going to come in clutch here, and I think there's certain games that are really going to show that off. I think some teams have played Doomfist incredibly well. I think Atlanta's Doomfist comp probably looks better than Houston's, in my personal opinion, just a little bit. But both those teams were radically successful in certain games. So really interesting compositions. I don't think we'll see much change until we get to the next tournament cycle, purely because we don't have another balance patch just yet, unless some of the teams have been hiding Orisa strats from us. I think that's what we're looking at. So we'll see how we go, but an excellent first week, some quite innovative stuff coming out, especially from this game, and I'm excited to see what will happen in the rest of this weekend and what happens in the next few weeks leading up to the kickoff clash, because I think that other teams are going to innovate and they will try different things. Maybe we'll really hit some more Zarya stuff. We've seen some Rush being played as well. It wasn't just Doom and Winston, but I think Doom and Winston are the top stories going into this. So that's what happened last week. Last week, pretty good. Really pretty good. 13 matches. I watched all of them. Very, very tired, but really good stuff. And now we're going into this week. I think that we really do have a litmus test coming for a couple of teams who are sat at the top of the table. Now, those teams are none other than the San Francisco Shock and the Los Angeles Gladiators. The Gladiators obviously getting a 2-0 victory. 2 wins. 3-1 victories over New York and Boston, as I've already said, and Shock getting 2 3-0 victories over Paris and London. Now, both of these teams have got some pretty big matches coming up this week. Gladiators, as you can see on your screen right now, they're going to be playing against Dallas Fuel, who really started to hit their stride against Washington Justice, and they really put them away. They put them away quite clinically with a 3-0. So Gladiators have got a very, very big task coming up in front of them. I think it's a task for Dallas as well. That match in particular is going to really showcase which one of those teams is going in at the top. And I mean, a lot of people put them in as their 2 top in NA. And as for Shock and Paris, as for Shock really cleansed Paris and London. And I think that they have a very, very big game as well against Houston. So if they can, convincingly put Houston away, they also have a game against NYXL, which is probably towards the lower end. We're going to get a bit more of a flavor for what Shock are all about and what they're truly good at, and whether, their first 2 matches was more of a flash in the pan or whether they really are the real deal of a rookie team. It's an exciting time, honestly, to be a Shock fan with the way that all those rookies played last week. I'm very excited to see how that goes. But again, these 2 teams are going to have to step up and perform really 3 teams if we're including Dallas and also Houston as well. Technically, it's a litmus test for all of them, but, I think more so Gladiators and Shock because they haven't had any top tier opposition just yet, as we'll call it. And then my final VOD segment, which I'm throwing into here, is a bit of a meme. So we've already had essentially the Bread Bowl from last year. We had Vancouver, we had them play against London, and London came out on top. London now with, the same amount of wins this season as they got in the entirety of last season. That's 1, by the way, but it's a good one. It's an excellent one. They basically started their season the way that they ended last season with the win against Vancouver. Really good stuff, and convincingly too. But we essentially have what I'm calling Bread Bowl 2 coming up. Now, Bread Bowl 2 is Boston versus London. Obviously, Boston and London both playing against high-tier opposition last week in Gladiators and Shock. But both of them also playing Vancouver, and both of them winning. Okay, yes, Boston only pulled a 3-2. They only just won it. It was very close, to be perfectly honest. But these 2 teams are essentially what I would describe as the ones at the bottom of everyone's power rankings, bar mine. I think Paris are down there as well. And I think that this is going to be a really, really interesting contest. This is essentially Bread Bowl 2. This essentially, much like the litmus test for the top teams, I think this establishes the pecking order at the bottom. And I really do think that London have a pretty high chance of coming out of this one on top, especially if their rush is looking as good as it's going. But I think there's going to be a lot of dependency on map pool to see whether they can pull off that success. We'll simply have to see how that all goes. But honestly, I think the Bread Bowl 2 is a really big match to look out for, and I'm really excited for it. That's going to be a good one. That's on Saturday. That's Saturday night. So awesome stuff. Really awesome stuff coming in this week. So let's jump into some Preds, shall we? I'm going to be talking about my Preds. I'm going to be talking about, what I think of the games of the week. I'll pick one for every day. And we'll just try and get these underway, essentially. I will be taking influence from chat in this one. The chat are here. But we'll see. We shall simply see. I think let's start off with Vancouver then. Now, listen, last week, all my stock in Vancouver. Last week, I threw all of my stock at Vancouver, I ignored the Scrimbuck Stock Exchange and said, Vancouver, you got this, okay? And you know what they did? They failed me. They entirely let me down. They let me down twice over. I don't think I can do that again. And I put a little bit of faith into Florida last week, giving them, obviously, I actually got both my Florida Preds exactly correct, I think. I got it right when they played Atlanta, and I got it right when they played Paris. And I think Florida look okay. Florida genuinely look pretty okay. Like a really, really solid pick for the mid-tier. And I think that mainly their match against Houston is going to be an excellent litmus test to how high they can go, especially if they're able to counter that Doom comp effectively, with some good Tracer play and, XC or Checkmate come out on some good Tracer. So I'm going to give a 3-0 to Florida against Titans. I can't trust them this time. I'm sorry, Titans, you let me down. If you can lose 3-0 to London, you can definitely lose 3-0 to Florida. Shock versus Outlaws. Now, this is going to be my game of the day for Friday. I was very, very close to calling it Washington versus Atlanta, but I just think that Atlanta are probably going to roll. I am going to give it to Shock, which is interesting because obviously last year, Houston's second game or first game was against Shock, and they managed to pull out a 6-map thriller and beat them 3-2. They were playing a lot of rush back then, obviously. Times have definitely changed. But I think what the Toronto versus Houston match showed me is you can effectively counter a Doomfist composition by getting some excellent targeting onto the backline and also by running a Tracer, because this Houston composition was very dependent on running an Echo to stick away from Genji. I think that, you put in a Tracer, you're just getting so much more value. And San Francisco have one of the best Tracers in the world at the moment, to be perfectly honest. Proper, after last week, looks like the real deal. I think Proper, really, really did excellent. I think it's still a little bit early to say entirely whether he'll live up to the ultra hype that we've all been giving him, but I do think that there's a lot of potential there, and he looked excellent against London and Paris. So I'm gonna give Houston the benefit of the doubt and say they take one map. I think that's fair. But I think that Kaluge, even though he's an off tank, his main tank has looked excellent. I think his Winston looked really, really good last week. And I just think that the Proper Tracer will be an excellent counter to what Pelican maybe runs in terms of the Echo. I think Houston though might bring out a surprise. This is quite a pick that's based on what I've seen from this week. I do believe though that Houston will probably switch it up. They were very well prepared for Dallas. I can imagine them being pretty well prepared for Shock. Maybe they throw in Piggy and play some Zarya. Maybe they play some different roles kind of thing. We'll see what happens, but I'm gonna leave it at 3-1 for now. As for the Justice versus the Rain, I was incredibly impressed with Atlanta's backline. Ultraviolet looks incredible on it. Just absolutely incredible. Hawk's Doomfist was excellent, like really, really good. Obviously Nero was absolutely incredible on the Genji. I actually personally think that Nero was probably the best Genji in the league this week. So yeah, I'm not really feeling Justice right now. I think that Fuel really did wipe the floor with them. But they had a very close series against Toronto, which they could have lost, quite frankly. And while Happy had some incredible pop-off moments as well in his game against, God, who else did they play? New York, I think it was. No, it wasn't New York. Can't remember. No, it was Toronto. Happy had some really, really big pop-off moments where he just absolutely decimated. I don't think that Decay's, Genji was anything that sincerely special. I think that when Mag came in on the Winston, they looked a lot better. I think that when they had Kalios in on Ilios, it didn't look fantastic. And actually, their backline did surprise me. Like, I think Krillin and Opener were a lot better than I expected them to be, which is good for them. But I'm not convinced yet in Washington. I think it might be fair for me to give them a map for the benefit of the doubt, which I think I might do. Because I can imagine some... Well, no, because I think Kai hyperpounds. Kai kind of hyperpounds. I mean, Happy and Kai are kind of on a similar level. Kai probably a little bit higher. So yeah, no, I'm going to give Atlanta the 3. I'm going to say that Justice are just gonna get rolled here. I think that Atlanta as well play a Doomfist comp in such a way that they are able to play effectively against the Monkey comp. But we'll see. I'm going to give them the 3-0 for now. I might change that, but I'm going to keep it the 3-0 for now. Moving on to day 2. So my game of the day for day 2 is Gladiators Fuel. I was very close to picking Bread Bowl 2, but I think Gladiators versus Fuel is a pretty safe bet for game of the day. Boston versus London. So, to be honest, a sane man, a sane human being would put their money on the Boston uprising, because I think the Boston against Gladiators at the very least had some really, really good stuff. But the only map that they really performed on was Eichenwalde. They got decimated on Gibraltar. And as a result, that was also one of the maps that London really, really suffered on because they couldn't play Rush. I think that the map pool is probably going to favor what London want to run, potentially. Most of these control maps really do. I think Push is a really good place to run Rush. That's a bit of a tongue twister, isn't it? To run a bit of Rush. So we're looking at something pretty decent there. And I genuinely think this is going to be a 3-2 encounter. So I'm going to put my money on London. I'm going to give London the benefit of the doubt. I'm going to choose to believe in London and believe in my early Scrimbucks my early prediction that Boston are going to fall apart. Because I have to say, right, Striker looked fine. I wouldn't say Striker looked better than many other soldiers in the league. Honestly, it was fine. Valentine's Genji was fine. Yeah, I'm going to give this to London. I'm going to choose to believe in London. Maybe I'm a fool. We'll see. All right, Gladiators versus Dallas. So I can't believe I'm going to do this. This hurts me with every fiber of my being. But I am going to give this to Dallas. I think it will be a close encounter. But I think that Gladiators looked a little bit shaky at the beginning of the season. if the Dallas cycle of misery is anything to believe, they have to have a win against LA to make everyone believe in them. And I think that this could be the win in LA. I mean, I can't play LA Valiant anytime soon anyway, so it has to be Gladiators. And I'm not entirely convinced by Paddy Pan just yet. I think that Paddy Pan is playing because they need him for the Genji. I think he is a very good hyper flex in his own right, but I think he came out with quite a lot of nerves, and you could physically see that when he was playing against Boston. He was clearly getting a little bit disrupted. Obviously, on Twitter afterwards, he said a win has never felt so shit. And I think that's fair enough. Like, he probably feels like he underperformed a little bit. He can obviously go higher. Let's believe that. Okay, Paddy Pan can go higher. But I, for the sake of this, I would personally hope that they put Arns in on the 76 and get Kevster on that Genji and that Tracer and let Kev work. I think that's the way that you beat Fuel right now, because if you're going into a Zarya matchup, I think Harbin's going to win. Simple as. I think you're on a Monkey matchup. I think that Fearless wins, you know, and the way that Dallas were dismantled was by Doomfist play, and to be perfectly honest, I don't think Reiner and Space have really picked it up yet, but I also don't think that they've showcased it yet. Shu was cracked this week, absolutely cracked in the backline. I think Funny Astro was fragging into the backline as well pretty well. Yeah, but I have to say, I think my money's on Fuel at this current point in time. And you know what? That's one of the first times I've chosen not to believe in Gladiators. But for me, at least if Gladiators are going to lose, at least I'll get pick'em points, you know? And if Gladiators win, that's infinitely more important to me than pick'em points. So it's a win and slightly easier to take loss for me. That's why I'm doing that. New York versus Titans should actually be the real Bread Bowl. I want to call this Bread Bowl 3. Because New York looked bad for most of this this opening weekend, and Titans also looked bad. I believe Necra said that, well, when London was playing Vancouver, I believe she said that, you know, she really did not know what was going on. You know, it was just a clown fiesta. So I'm gonna once again give this to a team that I just think is gonna overperform, and I just think that New York will get their first win of the season. I could sneak a little map in for Vancouver, honestly, because New York might, you know, shit the bed on some kind of map. But honestly, I just think that Yaki is a carry bot at this point in time, and I do think that New York did perform relatively okay against Gladiators. I think they got hammered hard by Atlanta, but I think that was more because they came up like against the Doomfist. And Gladiators did run Genji into that Echo. They chose to do that and still bodied them. So, you know, I don't know. Yeah, I'm going to give this a 3-1. I am going to give the benefit of the doubt for Titans to get a map, because I don't think they look dire. You know, they are probably the worst in the league right now, but they don't look dire. But New York, man. New York will take this, I think. I should really give them a 3-0. I'm not going to, though. Not going to. Okay, day number 3, game of the day for day 3 is definitely Toronto and Paris, in my opinion. So yeah, I think Mayhem and Outlaws is probably a closer clash. I think Shock versus New York could be quite interesting, but I think that Defiant and Paris are two very interesting teams going up against each other. I'm actually going to start with that one, because I think the Defiant looked incredibly good this week. I genuinely believe that they were very, very unlucky against Washington, and I think that Paris just kind of got bodied wherever they went. And I do believe, like, in my heart of hearts, that Paris aren't going to be good this year. They have just signed another DPS player in Wub. That's his name. His name's Wub. So we'll see how that goes for Paris. And I think that because so many people believe in Paris and believe in their coaching and the existing synergy, that they could be good. I just don't think they've upgraded enough this year. And I think that first week really showed it to me. Like, they couldn't pull a map off of Shock if they tried, you know, and they did manage to get a map off of Florida, but Florida literally cheated, okay, and they rolled them when having to replay their attack side on Circuit Royale. What more do I have to say? Honestly, I'm all here for Toronto, but I think it's interesting because you want to see if Paris are going to be able to pick up. You know, I think that's why this is such an interesting game. And because it's the only game that the two of these teams play this weekend, I think that makes it doubly interesting to see how they've improved. So I'm going to go for a cheeky 3-1. I believe that Toronto are in a much higher caliber than the Mayhem at this current point in time. But I think that Paris could sneak a map. I think that Paris could sneak a map if they maybe get some kind of rush going. I think Shock are going to 3-0 Excelsior. I don't even know if I want to say anything else on that one. I'm starting to believe in this San Francisco Shock team. And I think that it's a pretty easy stage so far. The fact that they've got, well, so far it would have been New York, Paris, and London, and then Houston. That's basically a drubbing for a lot of those teams, bar Houston, who are semi up there, in my personal opinion. So, you know, it's Shock, go back to work, do the business kind of thing. And then Houston versus Florida to me is really interesting. This, on paper, in my head, should also be another, like, 5-mapper. Much like the Toronto game, I could really see it doing that kind of thing. I think that especially in the match against Paris, I think that Sir Majed and Arnamo were great. Arnamo looks really pretty good this season, actually. I've been very impressed with the Lucio play. I think that someone on main tank as well has looked really good. Someone has looked, like, excellent. They've shown that they can play a bit of rush. They've shown that they can play, the monkey comps. I mean, yeah, not so much Doom, but at the same time, I believe in Checkmate's Echo. I believe in Checkmate to play a bit of Tracer to be able to just shut down Houston. I could totally sit here and get behind Florida for a few maps, but I do think that the quality of the DPS on the side of Houston will probably come in clutch here, and I think it will probably net them the win. I can't see them losing, 3 in a row. I simply can't see Houston losing 3 in a row. And these are all pretty decent teams. Like, I have to say, I think Houston have had a pretty rough go of it. Like, next week, the weekend after, they've got London, and the weekend after that, they've got Paris. So they do get a bit of respite, but still difficult. So that's it. Those are my Preds. That's what I'm going to go with. Yeah, I might change them, but I desperately need points. So you gotta go outside the box when you want to get some good old-fashioned points. You know what I'm saying? That's simply the way that it works. But yeah, that's what is going to be it for this. This was obviously filmed live on Twitch. I had a really nice time doing it, obviously. Thank you very much for watching. If you watched it here, if you guys are watching it on YouTube, sick. Let me know what you thought. Drop some stuff in the comments, okay? I'd love to know what you guys are actually predicting, or if you think that a lot of my picks are scrub picks, which is absolutely understandable if you think that. So yeah, thank you again. Have a really, really good weekend, and we will catch you all in the next one. I'm going to go and play some Overwatch 2 now before the beta goes away.